Yeah. All right, so at this point, we're going to transition to Vic's presentation. So if you've got a conversation, maybe you can take that outside and come on back when that's finished up.
Presidential saying, be quiet.
Drew, I've got a question for Ed Rusa.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Ed, although the clothing with the logo on it, will there be an option for us to add our own call sign at some extra cost if we want?
I can check into that, and I'm not sure about. I'm sure it can be done. I just I'll check with him on that.
Okay, I'd appreciate
Because
it.
everybody will be doing their own order, but there'll probably be a cost extra, especially if it's embroidered. But I don't see why
I think
not.
with embroidering, it's probably the easier one to do it versus trying to modify the screen.
Right. Yeah. Either way, I'll check with him.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So Vic, N2LZM. Tell us a story.
I don't think we went on our break yet.
What?
Yeah.
We didn't get our 5-minute break yet.
Oh,
Well, some people
No.
do, some people.
Okay.
Some do. Is there any food left?
There's some coffee. Yeah. I think you need the mic.
got a mic?
If you're gonna put it on Zoom.
Yeah.
Can I lean in here like this?
Sure. Yeah.
Pick me up if I'm not looking at it.
Let me do this.
That's better.
Yeah. I knew you put it off quick enough.
There'll be more coming back in and grabbing the
Yeah.
coffee.
Go ahead.
I'll follow you.
Teacher told me, she said, well, a voice like that, you better use it for in public speaking or something or other.
There you go, we've got a lot to say.
What years were you in?
69 to 73.
Yeah, that's about the time that I was able to avoid it. Do the permits and
Yeah,
high lotto number.
I actually got my draft papers. And I wasn't really in a good place I was in business with my father and all that business. It was hard to go.
Yeah, I was working from 66 to 68. I was in college, so I got the college permit. And then I went to work for NASIG, and they were giving the permits for that. And so I was able to get them until they quit giving the permits. And then they offered that, volunteer for the service. If we don't get you by December 31st, we'll reclassify you. So on December 31st at 4:30 in the afternoon, I went to the Johnson City Post Office and took my thing out to the draft board in Endicott, sent it registered mail, and I knew unless they hand carried it, there's no way would that get from the Johnson City Post Office to the Endicott Post Office and delivered in Union. So that's the way I got out of it. So
I went up to the recruiting station in Binghamton and I went to all the branches. And because I already had my draft papers, nobody wanted to help me with anything except the Marine Corps.
mhm.
They said, if you pass this battery of tests, we can guarantee you getting into the air wing. So, it was all electronic stuff, so
Mhm.
it was easy. That was electronic key, so.
Walking the field and shooting at people and
Right.
or being shot at.
Not all Marines are grunts.
No. Yeah, my dad was in communications, but he was in World War II, so he got one. So, he heard the bombing in the whole world, but he was fixing radio.
Joe Brown did the same kind of thing. He was in communications, so. Very good.
All right.
Contrary to what he said, I was in the infantry, okay? And I didn't have all of those, okay, it was only 20 aircraft that we were concerned about, and you had how many?
Three squadrons of fighters and one squadron of helos.
Right.
And then we would take in the usual or occasional KC-130
Right.
or C-130 or others. So we have any Vietnam veterans in here beside Joe? Nobody? We have any veterans? No vets? That's surprising. Can't say thank you for your service.
That was one signature away.
Police.
Yeah, okay, this is gonna be a Q&A, so I'm just gonna kind of move along here. I thought I might be able to use my, if I can get it out of my pocket, my laser pointer, but I don't think I'm gonna be able to. So I'm gonna bounce around a little bit. So top of the sheet here, the word radar is both a palindrome and an acronym at the same time. You spell radar forward and back. It stands for radio detection and ranging.
How did you pronounce that?
Radar. You got me all messed up with you. Okay, radar range mile takes 12.3 seconds, 12.36 microseconds for a radar pulse to leave the radar, hit the target, and get back to the receiver. So that's all the calculations, all the stuff on radar are all calculated around that magic number. So there's more buzzwords. Range gate pull off. So when the radar operator picks up a target, they're trying to find it in the sky. So there's a point where they are, and then the blip that's on the radar screen can tell you the distance away from where where the radar is emanating. So range gate pull off is one of the ways that this piece of equipment, well, they call it jammed, but it actually deceived the radar. What it would do, it would pick up the pulse that hit the aircraft. It would delay it, and then it would amplify it and fire the pulse back. So what would happen on the radar receiver, the AGC would see this big pulse. So it would lock onto the big pulse, and the real pulse, the little one, would be down in the grass. So that would deceive the radar operators. They wouldn't know where they thought they knew where you were in the sky, but it was actually inside those pieces of equipment. There was how they did the delay was just hard to believe. It was a roll of coax about this big around, and that's how they did. They used that, they forced the received signal in there, let it spin around in there, amplify it, and then send it back.
So how long would it delay for? How long would it delay for? How long was the roll? Yeah.
It was about 75 feet. Well, it was RG 58. It was about a bigger coil. I never knew that I never saw the receivers.
Yeah.
I only saw the transmitter side. So
Oh, so you only worked on transmitters?
I worked on the stuff that was in the aircraft.
Okay.
To deceive the.
Okay.
He was on the transmitter side
Yeah.
Right.
in the aircraft, sent back the
Yeah.
phone calls.
Okay.
Now, let's see, where was I? Let's see. So buzzwords. Pulse recurrence frequency. So if you've got a radar, let's say you're operating an airport or a base, a Marine Corps base. And you've got aircraft coming in that are landing, and you got them on radar. Well, that's a short range radar. Short range radar the pulse recurrence frequency very, very, very high, which means they're firing out pulses at a very high rate, which gives them a very high resolution. So they can tell a lot more about that aircraft. If you're looking for long-range radar, you're just waiting to see that, something, a target might be approaching you. That antenna goes very slowly. And, the other one that you'll see, yeah, it goes really, really fast. You'll see the same things if you see pictures of a ship on, in a movie or something like that. There'll be one that's spinning real fast when so the long range is very slow. And we used to have problems with our stereo equipment when we were in Japan. Every time the long range radar would go by, you could hear it go tick, 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 right through your music or anything like that. We had to wrap all our cables in aluminum foil. It was pretty interesting. Very, very high power. Those are into the thousands of watts. Very, very interesting. And I didn't work on those. So pulse recurrence frequency. Okay, Doppler radar. Anybody know what Doppler radar is?
No,
No?
I hear of it with weather.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting that nobody knows what Doppler is.
Or Doppler
I
effect.
know,
Doppler effect. Okay,
Yeah.
same idea.
Frequency
Right,
shift
same idea.
versus frequency of the target.
Right. So what happens?
Speed of the target.
Yeah, you fire a pulse. Aircraft is coming at you. You're getting a return. So what's happening? Every time the aircraft comes closer to you, you're crushing the waves. You're crushing them in, which makes the return frequency higher. So the radar operator can say, "Oh, he's coming at me." If you're going the other way, you're stretching him. Now that makes the wavelength longer. So he's going away from me.
Like a train whistle going
Exactly.
by.
Wow. Right.
Police radar.
Same idea. Same idea. Let's see. Okay, this is all happening due to a pretty fantastic piece of equipment called a traveling wave tube. The thing was about this long, had big knotty magnetic coils, permanent magnet and electromagnet coils, and had a interesting input pin. It's called a helix. And by modulating that helix, you can change the resonance inside the tube, which was interesting. You can make that tube do all kinds of things. And I'll get into more of it when we get a little farther down. Traveling wave jam.
When you say a tube, are you talking about a waveguide?
It's a waveguide kind of thing,
Okay.
but it's actually a vacuum tube. In the same way with the antennas on the aircraft. The aircraft had 4 antennas on it, one in the nose, one in the tail, and one on the end of each wing. Those were receive antennas, and those were all just with regular coax. The transmitted ones, like anything that was transmitting, would be using waveguide. Waveguide is essentially a pipe. That's all it is. You can look right down through it. It's a pipe.
A square pipe.
Square pipe, yeah. But there's round ones too. And it's manufactured to the resonance, the size of the square hole is resonant to the frequency that you're going to be using it. Or frequency band, I should say. So who likes to watch aerial combat movies on TV? You can stream now, so you can see a lot of these things, but they're pretty exciting. Got a couple of recommendations. Top Gun, if you haven't seen it, and Top Gun Maverick, highly recommended. There's another one here that's more almost exactly what this whole thing is covering. That's called Flight of the Intruder. It was about 2 Navy Navy pilots that did something they weren't supposed to do. And they wound up crashing and whole thing, but it's that the airplane that they used in that movie was the A6. Let's see, there's some more. Helix. Okay, everybody knows what SAM is, right?
Yep.
You know, Uncle Sam?
Mhm.
Yeah, surface to air missile. Right? And then you have AAM, air to air missile. And you have AAA, or anti-aircraft artillery. Now, sometimes anti-aircraft artillery has a radar guidance system attached to it. There's not a guy sitting there pulling the trigger. This is all done by radar. The radar tells the gun where to fire. Who knows anything about chaff?
Oh, yeah.
You know about chaff? Cool. Chaff, I don't know if you ever saw in any of the movies where the aircraft gets in trouble or somebody's trying to knock it out of the sky. You see these flares come out of the sides of the aircraft. Well, some of those are chaff. What they are is the machine that dispenses them kind of looks like an overgrown egg carton. Each one of those egg cartons holes has an explosive charge, and all these pieces of sliced up aluminum and different flares for different frequencies. They're cut to the resonance of the radar that's painting the aircraft. So the higher frequency, the shorter the pieces of aluminum are. So when they get fired out of the back of the aircraft, they fly up, and they just waft because they're so light. They just sit there and waft, and you can hide behind that. They can't pick you out because it makes a big blurb on the radar receiver screen, so they can't differentiate you from that blob.
So you're saying that's different than the heat seeking, when it screws up the heat seeking missiles?
They're and same dispenser,
Yep.
different kind of flares.
Okay.
Those also explosive charge, but they would burn a little bit higher than the tailpipe of the aircraft. So the surface to air missile would see that higher temperature and go for it. But the flares also, it muddles up the missile. The heat-seeking missiles will only follow heat. They're not guided. Okay? So between what's coming out of the aircraft, between the explosion to get the flare out, and then the flare keeps burning at a higher temperature than the tailpipe, the missile will go for the chaff, the flare. And that's still in use today in a lot more smarter ways. Shrike missiles. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Well, let me talk about some of the technology that's employed. Now, when I go back to the Shrike missiles, it'll make more sense to you. So the big guy in this whole thing was the ALQ 100. It was 100-pound piece of equipment. It was so heavy that they made it in two pieces, and when you put it up on the bench to work on it, you had to disconnect it and put half at a time up on the bench and put it back together because it was so damn heavy. And that was an active countermeasures piece of equipment. The other pieces of equipment I'm going to talk about here were passive. They're only receivers and warning the pilots about what's going on. So the range, let's see. The ALQ 100, that's a deception jammer. That was that range gate pull-up I was talking about. And track breaker. So that when the radar operator thinks he's got a hold of you, he doesn't. The APR 25/26 and APR 27 were both radar receivers. The APR 25 was the cutest little thing. It had a screen about that big. And then the center of the screen, and then you remember the four antennas I told you about out on the tips of the outside of the aircraft? So by mixing those signals together, this thing would display either a straight line, a dashed line, or a dotted line. So straight line meant one thing, dashed line meant one, so forth. So you can tell when your aircraft being painted, and you can tell the frequency band that's painting you. And that introduces you to, well, what's coming after me? Is it going to be AAA fire? Is it going to be a SAM? Is it going to be air to air? That kind of thing. And it tells you the angle from where you're flying. If you see the line on the screen, you'll know he's over there. So you know something is painting you. So you're getting in danger.
This must have been all transistor logic.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I forgot to say it. It was all discrete components.
Right, because there's no microprocessors.
No, all discrete components, and the only piece of equipment, that was the first time I ever saw an integrated circuit, was in that chaff dispenser, that ALE 29 chaff dispenser. And what they were pull-out cards. And there was all the integrated circuits on there. There were no numbers on it, and when everything was all glammed over with the varnish, we had to do that because of the salt air and any kind of contamination and
Making moisture food.
yeah,
Informal code.
right.
So you couldn't fix that stuff. Right?
No, those we couldn't fix. All the other stuff that I've been talking about, we were working down to the component. Good.
I just wondered, I remember back in the eighties, late seventies, I used to do a lot of work on, construction, pipe fitting. We used to get into the IBM Federal Systems Division. And I know they did a lot of military work down there. I just wondered if they get involved in any of this stuff you're talking about.
The stuff that I worked on was not IBM. Well, wait a minute, I shouldn't say that. Because some of the people at Lockheed Martin, I don't know, whenever Lockheed Martin was IBM, that's gonna be coming down here when I mentioned wild weasels yet?
No. I
Okay.
remember seeing that name while I was there.
We'll talk about wild weasels in a while, but I'm glad you asked that question. And repairing these things down to the component, it's a work of art. It's just, nobody's going to be able, once I'm gone, and once we're gone, nobody's going to be able to do it anymore. It's going to be pull out of a card, for $1,000, throw that away, put it on the $1,000 card.
And hope that fixes it. And if it doesn't, you try another one.
Yeah, you can't fix anything. And we had a lot of problems because everything we had was like I say, varnished over. So we would take a probe with a very, very sharp point on it and poke through the varnish, and we would troubleshoot, okay, this is a bad diode. Oh, this resistor's open. Right? Then we would have to clean off all the stuff, the conformal coating, thank you. And then change the component, fire it up, make sure it was working properly, and then re-varnish it. And that also had to be done for carrier landings, carrier takeoffs and carrier landings. If you didn't have a good solder point, you had anything that was loose or anything like that, the stresses, the G forces would just.
One carrier landing,
Yeah.
right.
Exactly. Okay, another product, ALQ 81. Now, I had a top secret clearance. I was working on these, ALQ 100s. That was the cat's meow at its time. And these ALQ 81s, they were an active jammer. So what they would do is all kinds of communications, whatever it would just completely nullify it. I don't know what they were doing there, if they were broadcasting, full spectrum stuff or whatever, but I wasn't even allowed in the room when they were working on them. The guy that worked on them, we only had one guy, and he had a crypto clearance. I had a top secret clearance. The only time I can go in the room is helping to carry one in. They mounted underneath the aircraft on the bottom of the wings. Then they had a little propeller. And when the aircraft was flying along, the propeller would provide the power to run the thing. And I could listen by the door and I could hear it going beep, boop, 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 beep, boop, 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 boop. So it was making all kinds of sounds all over the spectrum. So anything that they do, control and command kind of stuff, just nullified it completely. But I never got to touch one. Okay, where am I? Okay, we talked about the APR 25. And let's talk about the APR 27. APR 27 was it monitored the radio link between a radar station and a SAM launcher. So if you were just going along and you weren't being painted, you wouldn't know anything. But if all of a sudden a radar swept you, the APR 27 would start warning you. It would go bee-ba, bee-ba, bee-ba. And as you got closer and closer, and when it got time for the SAM to be fired, the data rate would increase. The surface to air missiles were all guided from the ground. They didn't go after the aircraft on their own. They're blind. The radar is telling them where to go. So, like I say, the data rate skyrocketed once they pushed the launch button. So in the headphone, in the pilot would have it went from bee-ba to a dee-lee-lee-lee-lee-lee, and it wouldn't stop. And there was a red light on there. And that was called the oh shit light. So that's how the APR 27 told you that there's a SAM in the sky. Now, in the sky, it's not telling you where it is, and it's not telling you it's after you. It's just telling you there's a SAM. Now, if you refer back to the APR 25, you can almost tell where the direction where the SAM came from. Let's see, the pilots, a lot of the pilots, especially the ones that weren't familiar with the electronic countermeasures suite, these were all a suite. They all work together. And there's so much going on in that cockpit, and you're sweating bullets because you're going to get shot down, and you're trying to save yourself, and it just gets crazy. So they would either shut off the headphones, or they take the headphones off. Well, some of them were pretty damn lucky, but the thing is, like I said, these things were suites. So when the APR 27 knew the SAM was coming, whether they had their headphones on or not, whether they had the ALQ 100 turned on or not, it would get turned on to help those guys get through it. So the ALQ 100 would, deceive the ground radar just enough. So that surface to air missile would go by you. You could probably read the serial numbers on each side of it. The pilots used to come back into the shop sometimes with cases of beer in their hands.
Thank you.
Saved my life. There was this telephone pole that went right by the aircraft. Telephone pole. Pretty interesting.
Where do the missiles land? Any place?
Yeah, well, when you're in the jungle and you're fighting, it
Yeah,
doesn't
but
get.
was they didn't hit anything, but then some of them still there?
Yeah, probably.
Did
I'm
you know
gonna run a scenario in a few minutes. So let's see.
Okay, now you mentioned with the chaff dispensers,
what's that?
you mentioned with the chaff dispensers where the chaff was different wavelengths
Mhm.
of the metal that they did, so was there different dispensers on there, so, when it locked onto a radar identified that, hey, this is the high frequency radar, this is low frequency, know which one, or?
The pilot selected them. So that was one of the other reasons that the APR 25 had the different displays. A solid line was one frequency, a dashed line was the other frequency, and a dotted line was another frequency. So, and the chaff dispensers, like I say, they look like a overgrown egg carton, about this big, not that deep. That's when they were empty. I could pick one up, but when they were all full of charges, I couldn't pick one up. They're loaded right up. So the pilot would choose which flares or chaff to fire and how many of them.
Okay.
Because once it was empty, it was empty. They're like bullets, short bursts is the best way to do it. So you get a few more shots at them. Let's see. Let's go talking about wild weasels. These guys were nuts. The A6 was an all-weather attack aircraft. It was the ugliest thing you ever saw. It did not look like no, not that ugly. But this had this bull nose, and a monster radar was behind that bull nose. And the early ones only had one pilot. The second round ones, when they had more impressive countermeasures, was two pilots. Well, you had a pilot and you had what was called a RIO, radar intercept officer. So they go out hunting SAM sites. It's just amazing what these guys would do. So they'd be flying around. APR 25 would light up, tell you where the radar source was. They'd turn toward the radar. And they'd fly right toward the radar until the APR 27 would come up and start barking at you. And they knew they were going to get SAM. So they knew the area where they had to watch, because the APR 25 was telling them where it was. And they would hear the APR 27 coming up with the fast warning, and they would watch for the smoke trail that the SAM was putting out when it was launching. They'd fly right toward it. And when they got just about where the SAM is going to hit them, they'd veer off. And they'd do the dance again. They'd come around and then they'd watch it again. So what they tried to do was run the rocket motor out of the SAM, and it would just fall to the ground.
That's like those cartoons. It's like.
Yeah. And remember, oh, I'm glad you did that, because that's what I was going to say about the Doppler. When the traveling wave tube got a modulation on that helix, it would make the frequency that was being transmitted go with it was what they call a Ceradyne, was more like a triangle wave. And it looked like the plane was doing 6G turns in the sky. But that was no, and so the SAMs are trying to, if you'll see the movies, you'll see one. But the SAMs are trying to find out where the hell the aircraft is. And they're doing this dance, but to try to get around them and go at them again and until the motor, runs out and they fall.
So if they dodge it the first time, they swing around and go at them again?
Mhm.
Until it ran out of fuel. But they had the ability to track it so well because of that equipment, right?
Yeah, so. So now that's daytime. Daytime, they had a little better way of doing it. Nighttime, they would do a similar thing. They would see the paint, head for the radar, and they would watch for the flame trail outside of, coming out of the back of the SAM. Trouble is, you can't see the SAM coming after you. After a while, it gets kind of tough. So, and none of this works when they fire the second one, the third one, and the fourth one
At the same
after
time.
at the same time, because you're by then. So what these guys would do, not only they would fly looking for the SAMs, they would fly as soon as they got painted, they would fly right toward the radar site. And they would launch one of those what they call wild weasels. I don't know if this means anything to anybody. ARM-78 wild weasel,
Right, strike missile.
Shrikes. Yes, that's what they were, shrikes. The earliest ones, the very first ones, the pilot would fire it. They'd have to get pretty close, and they would fire it, and just they would home on the painting signal. And that worked pretty good for a few months. But the radar operators figured out what was happening. They were homing in on the transmitted radar pulse. So what they would do, they'd keep one finger on the SAM launch button and one on the radar button. And then they would turn the radar off, and the missiles, the Shrike missiles, would sometimes hit, but not always. They forget. There was no. The only guidance they had was from the aircraft. So when the radar got turned off, the aircraft couldn't give it any guidance anymore. So they came up with new ones that would remember. So they would fly toward them. They would get a lock on the location, and they didn't use GPS. I don't know how they did it. They must have put, some kind of equipment in their gyroscopes, whatever. And then they would finish to go home, even though the radar was off. They remembered where it was. But pretty interesting what these guys did.
So what aircraft did you work on?
It was a combination of A4, A6, and F4. The A4 was a scrappy little single engine fighter. It was designed mainly for close air support. So it had rockets and lots of bullets.
What was its nickname?
Skyhawk.
Okay, yeah. That was end of World War II. It was a prop, wasn't it?
No, this was,
Okay. That was
um,
A1.
they were after Korea.
Okay.
But they were just a little guy. They'd get in low, pound the hell out of whatever they could pound the hell out of, and then get away. But they had a smaller, older countermeasure system than what I've been talking about here. And the A6 that I was talking about is mostly what this is based on. So there were several versions. There was the A6 Intruder, A6 Prowler. That was the A6A. That's the Prowler. Then EA6B, that's when they really got into the countermeasure stuff. That was the cream of the crop. I didn't get to work on very many of those. And that was a two-seater with the reel and even better countermeasures. And as a matter of fact, the EA6, I don't know, there's about 7 other numbers now. They've used them until about a year ago, and they completely retired them. They put any kind of radar and jammer and all kinds of stuff on A6s. They use them for tankers. They use them for all kinds of stuff. It was a great airframe, and because it was all-weather attack, when any other aircraft couldn't be in the weather because, you know, the fog and rain, whatever, because it had such a powerful radar in its nose, they could do things and go places where nobody else could go. And then the F4s, that's an iconic plane that everybody knows about. During the Vietnam War, when those were, well, they were introduced, I don't know, about mid-war, I would think, something like that. They were the fastest fighter plane that there ever was. Only trouble with them, when the engines quit, they dropped like a brick. We saw a couple of them come in to the end of the runway. They ran out of fuel when they were coming back in, and you could hear it. You could hear the thing coming in, and then it starts stuttering and stuttering and stuttering. Belly lands on the.
Aren't you glad you just repaired?
Yeah. But they had the similar package that the A6 did, and that's what kept them from getting killed by SAMs.
What about the F-111? You know what that was?
Oh, that wasn't even.
That was afterwards.
Yeah, I was long gone from the Marine Corps by then. They didn't even have anything close.
Did you ever have to go up in the air?
No.
Service something?
No.
On the ground all the time?
Yeah.
You had a big trailer. A big trailer.
Anybody else have any other
Where
questions?
were you stationed mostly?
You're not allowed to tell them that country's thing.
I was stationed in quite a few places, but combat was Da Nang, Vietnam, and Nam Pong, Thailand. When we were stationed in Iwakuni, Japan, and that was getting close to the end of the war. So they sent squadrons from Iwakuni, Japan to Da Nang. And I was scheduled to go on a cruise on the Coral Sea. And I wish I had had the opportunity to be on the aircraft just for once, because oh, what an orchestra.
So you never, did any of your locations ever get, like, when you were there, attacked?
In
Like-
Da Nang.
I know Janae did at one time, but while you were there, is what I'm saying.
Yes, oh yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's what I'm going.
Absolutely. They blew up the orphanage. They blew up the sick bay. They blew up the enlisted man's club, which was the worst thing.
All that
We had been back up in a few days.
That was the first thing I worked on.
It was interesting what they would do. They didn't have any sophisticated launching equipment. They would take a missile and they'd find a tree with a crotch in it. They stick the nose in there and they pick up the back. Oh my God. And they light it up.
But it worked.
Yeah, and most of the aircraft that was left out on the runways had a concrete revetment, so it was like a Quonset hut with concrete poured all over the top.
Yeah, a couple.
And there were huge walls. Yeah, they were 15, 20 feet high all around that revetment.
Just to stop that.
Right, so that, those gingerly launched missiles didn't hit the planes on the tarmac. Now, how those pilots would do that dance with those SAMs, I just can't.
Well, you guys saved a lot
My
of
heart would be right here.
So if all this equipment worked, how did anybody get shot down?
Like I said, when there's one SAM after you,
Okay,
you can
okay.
you can survive. The ALQ 100 would jam if you took your earphones off and turned the equipment off, you know, that kind of stuff. The ALQ 100 would save you. Right? But when there's 2 or 3 or 4 after you, it gets tough. You can't be in the wrong place at the at the right time.
Yeah.
Those chaff measures and the flare measures, just rough estimate. How many like, say you were the pilot, how many shots do you get off before you run out? Like, I know you said you try to spare, but I mean, it's just a limited amount. What would you say, 2 or 3 usually, and then you're out?
I'm trying to remember how many, there was either 40 or 60.
But a fair amount come out at a time though. I mean, or was it just one cylinder at a time off?
The
The pilot said pick.
The pilot would, there's a dial, a little spinner dial. So you want to throw 3 flares, you know, and push the button, or 3 chaff and push the button.
So you did several uses before you were helpless when it
Yeah.
comes to that.
Yeah.
But they did run out though.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that's why you wanted the short bursts, because once you're out, you're out. You know, you can't, there's no.
No, that's what I'm saying. though.
reloading.
You guys- That's what I was wondering, like realistically, you're flying in your tech. How many of those do you get to dispense in?
You know, you're saying things like that, C-130s or those big C-147s and those things, they all had those machines. They all had those same things, but they could reload those, theirs in the air.
But the pilot just had what's in it.
Yeah, because you can
He's
move
small,
around.
they're out there,
You can move around inside the aircraft. Well, when you're in a fighter aircraft, you're sitting in that seat and you're tied in
It's just what's there, is there. That's it.
and you can't move.
Right.
I mean, you gotta be in that seat, because if you have to eject,
That's the only hope.
that's the only hope.
You better be in the seat.
Yeah, I mean, you reach up and you pull it, canopy blows off, and then the explosive bolts that you've been sitting on explode and throw you out of the plane. So you're sitting there all fat, dumb, and happy. Then all of a sudden you got Mach 3 in your face, you know? Imagine that.
Shooting open song. So the radar would detect how far you were, or it would fake it out to how
Right.
far you were. How about the height? Was there a height thing?
That's what that Ceradyne thing would do.
The triangle wave?
The triangle wave, yeah.
Okay.
Because it would do polarities, and it would do so that, you know, it was this big ugly thing, and it was just doing this, you know. The radar operator couldn't tell where the aircraft was in that mess. Good.
I just wondered if you had any general idea how long an average mission of a fighter, how long would they be out, you know, before they came back?
That varied.
Lucky.
If they were pissed off enough, they would be launching, aircraft would be coming in, and aircraft would be taking off, coming in and taking off, nonstop. Just until they ran out of ordnance or whatever. That would be with the F4s.
I mean, like, would the flight be an hour or more than an hour?
That all had to do with the difficulty of the mission. You know, straightest line, you know, between 2 points. If they have to get around this and go over this mountain and avoid this site and all that, so depended on the fuel mostly. That's hard to say.
Right?
I'm
There
sorry?
must have been a fuel constraint.
Oh, yeah. The planes, a lot of times, there were fuel tanks in the wings, fuel tanks in the fuselage, and a lot of times there would be belly mounted or under the wings. Were like the same place where you put the bomb. There were fuel tanks. So, you know, depending on the mission. And if you ever watch the Fight of the Intruder, you'll see that. The catchphrase there was, "We're going downtown." Going downtown was downtown Hanoi. And that's where they kept all their spare SAM missiles. Showed them all lined up.
So did they really have automatic ejection on some aircraft when they were locked on with a missile? It sounded kind of dumb to me.
Automatic eject?
Yeah, that it would fire the ejection seat if a missile was locked on. I heard about that, but I guess they disabled it.
I haven't heard about automatic,
Okay.
but that's another amazing thing. When it's all timed, you know, it has to be perfect. Because if it's not, you're killing the pilot.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they have to know when they're going out because it was automatic if they had their arm in the
Right,
wrong way.
an automatic would be deadly.
Deadly, because you gotta brace yourself and everything.
Right, you gotta know it's
And
coming.
you still ended up with.
You gotta have
back.
time to make a sign of crime.
Now, you said the ejector seat had the,
Expl-
ordinance underneath it to launch you out. Did that ever go off when it wasn't supposed to?
The early ones did. And
Killed some pilots.
a few guys got plastered into the ceiling.
Canopy wasn't open. So.
Yeah,
Sometimes the canopy wouldn't open.
yeah, if the plane gets shot up. Or it takes a lot of heavy flak or do something that twists the airframe. It's like, you know, being in a car accident, you hit something, you bring it to the body shop, never right again, because it was twisted. And that will stop things, because they're all on the slide. The canopy will slide forward and then blow backward. So it has to be able to slide forward enough to get out of the rails. And so, it's a lot going on there, and it's millions and millions and millions of dollars every time you lose one. You know, it's a tough thing. Oh, another thing, all these pieces of equipment, they all had incendiaries. Plane crashed, or I think it was optional with the pilot too. No, it couldn't be.
It's like scuttling it. So
Yeah,
there's no
yeah.
evidence, so they can't take it.
Yeah, they didn't want them to reverse engineer it. Yeah. Pretty interesting stuff.
And I had a problem in World War II with that.
You did?
No, I did. No, the
Oh, you
Americans wanted the British radar
Yes,
that used magnetrons.
yes,
And
They
they
had
had
a better-
a solid chunk of steel.
yeah,
And they didn't want them going down in Germany and surviving the crash.
Right.
And they couldn't talk the Americans into not using them, and that's how the Germans got the technology.
I found out something about that. I watched one of those documentaries. Pretty interesting. How rudimentary the radars were in
Oh,
the beginning. It was just amazing. And the whole thing with Pearl Harbor. Well, if it was just a little bit better, they could have avoided that.
The one I've read several books on Pearl Harbor and thought about it. And I don't know what the Japanese were thinking. Not that they screwed up on the surprise attack.
No, they did a perfect job.
No, they didn't.
Yeah.
They
Well,
didn't
no,
take
I
it.
know, no, you're right. I know. I
Ships
saw
on
that.
40 feet of water to be recovered. We recovered everything but the Oklahoma and the Arizona were put back in action.
And they left all the service.
And they
and
left
the
all
fuel.
the fuel oil.
All the fuel. that's
sitting
service.
there.
Right, yeah, that's.
All the
those are
fuel
the
they
mistakes.
Should have hit the fuel
They
oil,
never-
the hell with the
They
battle.
never touched the service, the fuel, and that meant everything was right there, right back.
And they could have killed more people if they did it at a different time and a different day.
They were
It was a
supposed
Sunday
to hit
morning.
that with the second wave, but he canceled the second or third wave.
Well, they were afraid that
But it
smoke
was
was
a well-
up and bombing the ships. They just took out the fuel oil supply
The line of sun.
Would have sent them back 6 months. They said,
In real.
6 months. Off the bat, they hit that. Well, you guys, everything you just described, where you're talking 55, 60-year-old tech,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
it's amazing.
Pretty sophisticated.
And we go to a ham fest and we see a 50-year-old radio and they say it's a boat anchor. And you're talking, this stuff was that same or a little bit older. And it's
And you can take it apart and fix it
But it's-
yourself.
Exactly, and it's in fighter jets. And here we are in 2023 and we still think it's cool. I mean, like, really, like high tech, I still think right now, that's pretty high tech.
Well,
How
you
many
were,
hands are still
doing it
using
in
the old
street,
tank
that was
radio?
the challenge.
Exactly.
You know, and that's when we first heard about an integrated circuit.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, that,
So that had to be 66, 77.
76 to
We're talking 56 years ago, it's just amazing.
I didn't see an integrated circuit until I had to go to school to learn how to work on the equipment. And I was probably a year and a half into the Marine Corps before I even saw that it, PPR 27.
You mentioned the F-111. I was, General Dynamics in Rochester wanted me, and one of the big things they were doing was making radio equipment for the F-111. And I asked the guy that was taking me on the tour, I says, if the Vietnam War ends, I said, am I gonna have a job? And he said, you might be doing something else. A year later, they turned that into a vocational school.
Yeah.
So, I was mighty glad that I never took that job. I watched my dad with subcontract work for IBM and, feast or famine on that. I said, nope, not this guy.
Well, I'm sure this area went through the same thing with Lockheed Martin and GE. You know, all that stuff was all involved here. The stuff that I worked on was it Sanders Associates in Vermont was one of them, and then
The federal division in Owego was just, they did a lot of submarine work. A lot of people didn't realize that. Yeah, I talked to a guy that I worked with, I worked in the senior home, and just like you were saying, yeah, they did work for submarines, right in Owego, but it was all top secret. And he said we had to make all the electronics so that it could be submerged. So that when a compartment flooded or when it got unflooded, it would still work. And same thing, just old tech.
yeah.
Nice presentation. Thank you for that. You guys saved a lot of pilots' lives, I mean, without a doubt.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, without a doubt.
Oh, yeah.
You know, those guys love there and you didn't solder something right, no protection.
That's right. We still, it was life or death. Yeah.
No, I know what I mean.
No doubt about it.
Think of pressure every time you're solder or something, you know, you screw up.
We're still using
LPTs in our lab.
Really?
No, I got.
Yeah, we had broadband or.
I'd like to have that pressure for when you solder. Screw that up.
Whoa.
For some reason, I haven't been at maintenance on them. Every year I gotta fire those holes, you know, it's fine, it's boiler reading. I gotta fire them up for an hour every year, or else something will happen.
I'll have to put them on the cart.
Do you need repair or replace? Neither, they're broadband amplifiers, and then the presentations on them, is they gotta, if we don't use them all year, we gotta fire it up and just let it run idle for an hour.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's the important capacitors. No, it's the TWA was just for traveling weight tubes. Not a bad thing. Not repair. I don't know what it is exactly, but they say that TWTs will suffer if they are not used right. Maybe they'll leak down if they don't get. Yeah, I know it's.
Jim pulled that particular vintage.
Is that quite a healthy dream? Which one? Oh, is this? All my years, I made all my earrings from all the different components. You'll see me with a little, motor bridge rectifiers in my V8. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's.
Yeah, I work in the electromagnetic.
That was the top of the line back then.
Doing with broadband RF amplifiers.
everything they make it be radar and microwaves and everything like that. But 10 kilohertz, 18. Now, because they're all tractors, they're using from that to that. Yeah, I don't.
We don't know. Oh, no, it's just gonna be. I think it's great. They may have to like cancel the bear apart, like, you know, under the law. But that's fine.